All right, delegates, welcome to our final session. We're very excited to have two esteemed guests here with us today for the final session of this conference. Thank you so much for a fantastic 4 days, and we truly did save the best for last. I'm very excited to have both Adam and Rupert here with us today for our closing keynote right before we end and go into closing ceremonies. With quick introductions first, I'd like to introduce Adam. So Adam Cheyer is an inventor, an entrepreneur, and an engineering executive, and a pioneer in AI and computer-human interfaces. And as all of you know from the title, he's big in the world of NLP. Adam has been a co-founder or a founding member of 4 big startups, including Siri, which he sold to Apple and then later led as a server-side engineer in the AI assistant team. And then he also founded change.org, which we've all used, which is the big petition platform that is used for a variety of different things. It's the largest in the world. And he also founded Viv Labs, which was later sold to Samsung, where he was the VP of R&D and was on the team that built Bixby, which was their voice assistant. So he built 2 out of 3 of the biggest voice assistants in the world. And then he also founded another startup, Sentient, which was massively distributed machine learning, and that was sold to Cognizant. So 4 incredible entrepreneurial experiences, but on top of that, he's a magician, and we're excited to dive into that further as well. Adam has authored more than 60 publications and 37 patents and served on a large array of advisory boards and committees, and he completed his master's degree from the UCLA School of Engineering. All right, then we have our moderator, who's a close friend of mine, Rupert Kane. Rupert's a graduate of UC Berkeley, and he worked for Deloitte Consulting right after, working on cutting-edge AI and ML problems for Fortune 500 companies. Rupert and Adam have met through their mutual love of tech and magic, and as a famous quote says, any good technology is indistinguishable from magic. Rupert's also an accomplished magician. He's performed for some of the world's biggest celebrities, including George R.R. Martin, Emily Blunt, John Krasinski, Usain Bolt, Lin-Manuel Miranda, and many more. He started a magic club at UC Berkeley, and slowly through that pipeline, they've produced 2 Penn and Teller Fool Us contestants, and somewhere along the way, he met Adam too. So I'll let them introduce themselves and discuss the structure of the session. I just wanted to say one final word on the Q&A. Just like we've done for the past few days, please feel free to drop all your questions in the Q&A session and upvote the ones that you like most, and then our team will pass that on to Rupert to ask Adam. All right, Rupert, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Zio. And thank you, Adam, for graciously coming and giving us your life advice. Delegates, feel free to drop in your questions. Yeah, like the structure for today will take place for 45 minutes. We'll ask some pretty structured question about Adam's background and advice in a career in technology. And then we'll go into Q&A and get some of the questions from all of you. So without further ado, let's begin. First off, Adam, let's start with the question that everyone wants to know. Why is Siri called Siri?
Thanks, Rupert. Great to be here and great question. So we were a small startup before we sold to Apple. And every startup needs a name. We needed a domain name, and we wanted it to be human sounding, but not too common. We didn't want Bob or Jim, so it needed to be a little bit exotic. We wanted it to be pretty short and able to be pronounced pretty easily. So we came up with a list of about 20 names that were short, pronounceable, and human names. And out of that list of 20, Siri rose to the top. And there were different reasons why people on the team liked it. So the official meaning was from our CEO. He's CEO, so he gets to choose. He's Norwegian American. And in Norway, Siri means beautiful woman who will lead you to victory. It's kind of a Norse goddess kind of story and tale. But there were other names. I've got 2 favorite meanings. Siri in Swahili means secret, and a secret is something that I know that other people haven't figured out yet, like a magic trick, right? It's all about secret. So Siri means secret in Swahili, and the second meaning that I like for Siri is that my son, so I like parent-child relationships where there's some relationship between the names. So my name is Adam, is the first man in the Bible. We're all descendant from Adam. and my son's name is Noah. Also, in the Bible, we're all descended from Noah because of the big flood. So kind of similarity. The system that I built just before Siri was called Iris. And if you think about it, Iris for me is the mother of Siri. Siri's the child, and there's a relationship between the two. If you reverse the two, Iris backwards is Siri. So for me, Siri was the best name for at least those reasons. There are more, but the official meaning is beautiful woman who will lead you to victory.
Wow, thanks for sharing. I actually did not know any of that, so it's great. Yeah, so you're most known as, even though you're most known as a creator of Siri, this is not the final stop for you. Like you merely think of this as a small stop on a larger vision. Can you share with us this vision, a vision that Steve Jobs shared with you when Apple acquired Siri?
Sure, that's a great question also. So, you know, people often think of Siri like coming out of nowhere. It was like an overnight success. And in that story, it's true. We started a little company, a small startup, to take this idea to market. We launched a free app in the App Store. And 2 weeks later, Steve Jobs called us unannounced and said, "Hey, it's Steve, what you doing? Want to come over to my house tomorrow?" And we're like, Steve Jobs is calling us? Like, how did he get our number? We didn't even know. So we began these discussions with Steve about the vision of Siri. And the start of the story, the first version and the birth of that vision actually happened what's now 28 years ago. My first version of Siri was in 1993, before I ever saw a web browser. And here's what I said. I said, someday there will be computers around the world with content and services that we want to access. So we'll need a way to discover those services and content and to interact with them. And the idea of using web pages and hyperlinks never occurred to me. That didn't exist yet. I thought everyone would have an assistant that you could say, I want to know this, or I want to do that. And the assistant would break your request into subparts, route it to the right machines around the world, aggregate the results, present them to the user, learn from any user interactions, and help the user get the job done. So I built a first prototype in 1993. It was like a little, almost iPad-like tablet that you could draw on and speak to, and you could delegate requests to services around the world, a dynamic community. And so all along this way, it was something like 18 years from my first prototype to when we launched. You know, I had been pursuing the same vision. So you asked about what's the vision that we shared with Steve. It was really as Siri as the internet. It was my vision of the web, right? You would ask things, it would help you do things, it would help you find out things. And it was very important to me that all that knowledge and content, just like the web, is not built by one company, it's built by all the world's developers. And he understood that. He said, we're going to put Siri on every device we make, every interface, TV, phone, everything. Speaking will just be one component of how you interact. Sometimes you'll touch, sometimes you'll speak. It should be multimodal. But ultimately, it will help control not only the built-in services that we started with, but every app and every web service in the world. And that for me was really what would take Siri to that next level.
That's interesting. So when you left Apple, what changed? Like, was there a deviation from the vision? And would you have done anything differently?
That's a great question too. So I wouldn't do anything differently that I could control, right? I loved my time at Apple. I think it's one of the best big companies in the world, especially when Steve Jobs was there. What many people don't know is that, you know, Siri launched October 4th, 2011. Steve Jobs died the very next day. And in fact, just about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, his executive admin wrote to me and said, oh, I've been meaning to tell you this for years, but I didn't know how to contact you. Steve Jobs was clinging to life to see the launch of Siri. So literally, Siri was so important to him. It was really his last great creation that he had to see it launch, and he fought to stay alive to see it launch. It gave me chills when I heard that. So after Siri launched, there were some changes, organizational and others, but the main thing was the humor side of Siri, I think, surprised everyone, including Apple. So when it came out, we had all of these domains. What's the weather? Set a timer, check a sports score, what have you. But, and we had, focused on building out all those capabilities. But many times people will ask it questions like, Siri, what are you wearing today? Or Siri, do you love me? Or Siri, what color are your eyes? They're not any of the specific domains like weather or timers. They're just like, they wanted to talk to Siri. And we had put kind of these funny responses in it. We call them delight nuggets or surprise and delight. So if you ask, what's the weather? It'd say, oh, it's going to be raining. Don't forget your galoshes. And people would go, oh, it has a little personality. And it knew it knew a few jokes. So when Siri came out, the personality captured everyone's imagination. It went viral. And then Apple's focus was really on that. How can we make it funnier? How can we, just make it more engaging? The base functionality that existed. What I wanted to do was pursue my vision, open it up to all the world's developers so that anyone could teach Siri new things, just like anyone can build a website. But that was not a high priority for Apple at that time. I'm an entrepreneur. I know that when you sell your company to a parent, big company like Apple, they get to do what they want with it, right? You no longer own it. You no longer control it. Even though I was in charge of all the server-side engineering and AI for Siri, I didn't get to decide exactly what the priorities were, what the focus was. At Apple, it's very hierarchical. Steve Jobs would decide, Scott Forstall would decide. And so when there was, a change of focus, that was frustrating to me. I was very, I loved my time at Apple. I was very proud of what we created. I loved the team that we worked with. I think we changed the world, but I was so desperate, like every entrepreneur is, to follow through on the vision, and that content and community that's open to the world was so important to me. I'm like, if we're not going to be working on that, I can't stay. And so I walked away from, a wonderful company, a wonderful team, more money than I could imagine, to say, if I can't pursue what's important to me, I'm not interested in staying here.
Awesome. And what was like the thing that you really wanted to focus on was opening it up, right, to open source.
That's right. What's called really giving it to a third-party ecosystem. Imagine the iPhone, when it first came out, there was no app store. The iPhone came with a bunch of apps on it, weather, stocks, finance, whatever, sports, map, and that was it. And it was a year later that the iPhone then opened up an app store, a marketplace, that every third party, every company in the world could build an app if they wanted to, and make money off of it. And that's what made the iPhone great. Imagine if the iPhone or smartphones only had the apps built by Apple. It would have been good, but it wouldn't have been great. And so for me, we started with Siri that came out of the box with, kind of like those apps, the functionality. But what was so important was next step had to be open it up in a truly democratic way. And then, looking back, like I said, Apple gets to choose. I still wish they would have focused on that more. Even today, Siri is not open in a truly democratic way, kind of like the web is, right? It's still very, very tightly controlled by Apple. So if I had been in charge, which I wasn't, of what Apple decides, I would have focused more on that.
Right. So when you left Apple and founded Viv Labs, what was the landscape like of the AI market? Was Google Assistant around?
No, nothing was around. So we launched, as I mentioned, October 4th, 2011. Now, Siri had started out in 2010 as a free app in the App Store, one of 2 million apps. But not that many people paid attention to it. But when Apple came out with the version, everyone was like, wow, this is different than anything we had seen. Now there was, there was search, right? Google had mobile search and even voice search. There was a little bit of technology where you could speak words and it would put them into a search engine and give you links. But there was nothing like Siri that would answer the question, that would do the task. And so when Siri came out, I think every company in the, big company in the world started paying attention. About a year and a half, 2 years later, Microsoft came out with Cortana. Google came out with their version. They called it, well, it was kind of a predecessor to Google Assistant. They called it Google Now, was this initial version. I think Alexa didn't come out till 2014 or 15. So, Siri started the trend. Siri did change the world and made people realize you could talk to a computer across a broad set of tasks and have it, for some limited scope of things, understand you well enough to assist you. So we set the trend, but people were interested in it. The movie Her started coming out. It came out in 2013, but once Siri launched, right as I was leaving, kind of 2012, the movie started under development. So people were interested in this. Companies started to come up with their versions of it. I often say it's kind of like, I don't know, figure skating or something. Someone will do the quadruple tricky move that no one thinks is possible, but the first time someone does it, 6 months later, everybody's doing the quadruple, whatchamacallit. So we showed the world it was possible and desirable. And then I think many other people started coming in afterwards.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know. So when Samsung acquired Viv Labs, that the technology that Viv Lab had was used to form Bixby 2.0. How are the companies, both Apple and Samsung, how are they different? And how is the technology itself different?
Okay, yeah, that's two really good questions. I'll take them one at a time. So first, let me talk about the technology. So I left in June, Apple in June 2012. I started thinking about what's next. And to me, while all the other companies in the world were trying their best to start cloning Siri, I knew what the next step should be. It should be about opening up to developers all the world's, an assistant. So an assistant not programmed by Apple or Google or Amazon, but really controlled by all the world's developers, like the web is or like an app store is. So I knew that had to be the next chapter. So in around December 2012, I joined with Doug Kitlaus, who was also the CEO of Siri. So we got back together, plus Chris Brigham, who was one of our top engineers from Siri. We started Viv Labs, and we started on a new kind of technology. Now, Siri was all about how can you get a computer to understand the complexity of human language. And most people don't realize how hard it is to understand human language. If I say, Rupert, book me a 4-star restaurant in Boston, you know what I mean. But how? Think about it. You're like, well, Boston's a city, but did you know that book is a city in the United States? And star is a city in the United States. And there are 13 different cities named Boston in the United States. So which city am I even talking about? And Star Restaurant is the name of a restaurant. But I'm not asking about a restaurant name. I said, book me a 4-star restaurant, not Star Restaurant. And there's so many ambiguities. It's a very complex thing to solve. So that's what Siri was about. What Viv Labs was about is, okay, once you understand the language, what do you do? So at Siri, this was all hardwired and hand-coded by programmers. So if you said, what's the weather in Boston? Okay, we would understand it's Boston, Massachusetts, the city, and weather, as I want the weather information. But a programmer would now code up that logic. They would say, I want, let's say I need to go find the closest weather station to Boston, Massachusetts, get its data. Then maybe I need to ask the user which Boston, because they might be in Texas. Maybe Boston, Texas we're talking about. They code that all up. And if I said, what's the weather where my sister lives? Well, that's a whole different program. Which sister? Maybe it should ask the user. I need to learn from that. So a human can't program every single answer to every single question. There's just too many. What's the weather at the Super Bowl? Ah, different program. Find where the Super Bowl venue is, right? So what we did with Viv Labs is we wrote an AI, an assistant, that could write its own code at the moment that a user made a request. When you talk to Bixby and you say, what's the weather 3 Thursdays from now, or 3 Thursdays after my sister's birthday, at that moment, there is no hard-coded program that decides what to do. The AI writes it. Once it understands what you've asked for, it will write the program for you at that moment to handle your request. And maybe I've got a different set of services. I like a very simple weather program. Maybe you're a weather nut who wants all the details and radar maps and use a different provider. It's going to be a different program for you asking it than for me. So that was the core technology difference, is that we wanted to have an open ecosystem. And we did this with Bixby. Any developer who wants to try out using the world's most powerful assistant platform for building kind of like a website, but you can teach Bixby a capability. You can just go to bixbydevelopers.com, download these incredible tools, and you will see you don't have to program the logic, and AI will write it for you. No one's ever done anything like this before. I think it's one of the most incredible computer science feats I've ever seen. Now, I'm biased, of course. I like the stuff we work on, but it's important. So that was the core technology. Create an app store that any developer could have the tools to build components. What's the weather? Where's the Super Bowl, et cetera. And then when a user makes the request based on the apps, or we call them capsules that they've chosen, it would dynamically write a program to use just the right services to answer their question. Okay, so that's the different technology. Siri, Google, Alexa, nobody else has anything like the core technology that's in Bixby. The second question you asked is, how is it different to work at an Apple and to work at Samsung? For me, they're both amazing companies. They're both incredibly successful. They produce products every day that hundreds of millions, if not billions of people use every day and love. But they have very different ways of doing things. So Apple, their culture prides itself on being an innovator. At least when I was there, they would never look at what's the competition doing. They wouldn't even ask what users want. They didn't do much user testing. They would have a vision, and then they would work incredibly hard and iteratively to build the most unbelievable user experience possible. That's what they were focused on. What is the user going to see? What is the user going to feel? And let's work backwards from there. And they don't care what anyone in the world says, does, wants. They're going to figure it out themselves. They want to be an innovator. Samsung, and I think, they pride themselves on being what they call a fast follower. They are excellent at execution. They might not come up with the vision themselves initially, but once they have a vision in front of them, Samsung thinks that they can execute better than anyone in the world and really just create an incredible product just by sheer force of will. So two very different cultures. Apple is extremely hierarchical. Samsung is similar in that way. I think, they're a Korean company. There's a lot of hierarchy. If an EVP says something, everyone underneath is doing it that way. It was the same at Apple. If Steve Jobs said something, his word is law, basically. And even if it's wrong, you have to do it that way and then try to convince them that maybe there's a better way. So that's one way they're similar. So yeah, so two very different companies, different mindsets, different engineering processes, but some similarities as well.
Right. And so even though Bixby was so advanced in its technology, in fact, I would say like it's so advanced that a lot of people don't even need CS degrees anymore, right? You can just tell, if you have an advanced Bixby, just tell them to write your if statements, just write a for loop and if statements, conditionals, everything for you. And maybe the future of computer science is in advancing technology like Bixby. But yeah, so even though Bixby was so advanced, do you think that there were like some operation errors or some strategic errors that made Bixby not consume as much market share as, say, Google Assistant or Siri?
Well, it takes different things. There's technology, and sometimes the best technology doesn't always win out. You need to change habits of people, and in order to get that adoption, for various reasons, so we were trying to build a marketplace. We wanted to give the tools to developers, any developer, so that for every industry, every use case, the world's developers could create that inside of Bixby and be monetized and make money from that. But on the other side of a marketplace is the users. You need users. So Bixby today is on hundreds of millions of devices. If you have a Samsung, one of the later Samsung phones, Samsung TVs, it's on Samsung refrigerators, speakers in Asia, it's on smartwatches. So it's on hundreds of millions of devices. But at least in the United States, not too many people know about Bixby. Why? Because Samsung has not invested much marketing for it. And there's, they'll have their reasons for doing that. But if you compare Siri or Alexa, number one, they're much older technology, so they've had a longer time for people to know about them, right? We only launched the Bixby marketplace really a little more than a year ago, whereas Siri's been around since 2011, and Alexa, I think it's like 2014 or 15, something like that. But it's still substantially longer. The second thing is they invest a lot of marketing. So this, last year, about 1 year ago, was the Super Bowl, the biggest advertising moment in US television. Both Alexa, both Siri had Super Bowl commercials. Bixby, I can't think of a single TV commercial or even newspaper advertisement. So the marketing, for various reasons, they had not pushed that. So it makes it hard to compete when everyone knows the word Alexa, everyone knows the word Siri, but most people, when they hear Bixby, they'll say either what's that or why should I use that? And you need marketing to kind of tell people, here's when to use Bixby and why. And without that, without being taught that, people don't use it as much. And so it's, that's, again, as I mentioned earlier, every company, when you sell a startup to a big company, they get to choose what to do with it, right? What to build, what to invest in, what not to invest in, why. They have their own strategies, and that's the way it should be. It's their product, no longer my product. I sold it because we wanted to get it out to hundreds of millions of devices, which we did. But I don't really get the control to tell them how to market a product or where to put their advertising dollars. But again,
right.
if I were in charge, I would have put some or more towards Bixby, because I think the potential of the technology is incredible.
Right. And so when you left Bixby just this when you left Viv Labs just this past July, this culminated 28 years of pursuing this vision. Like, was the primary reason of you leaving Samsung and Viv Labs the lack of marketing and transparency around Bixby, or was there another secondary reason that was more of the driving force?
There's always reasons. I won't go into many of the details. I'll say, like with Apple, I think Samsung's an incredible company. I am so grateful Samsung gave me a chance to try to pursue this vision again, right? I have this big vision of making an assistant as important as the web or as mobile. So I literally defined it. I said every 10, 12 years or so, a new interface paradigm emerges. So in mid-'80s, we learned about the mouse and Windows. 10 years later, 10, 12 years later, web and hyperlinks. 10, 12 years later, smartphone, apps, pinch and zoom. And the launch of the App Store was 2008. So I'm like, wow, 12 years later, last year, 2020, that should be the time when an assistant becomes yet another way to interact. A paradigm as important as the web or mobile, able to impact significantly every connected user and every connected industry, right? And so there are lots of Siris, they're great, there's Alexa, but Siri and Alexa and all the assistants are interesting and useful, but not important. No one is depending on the assistant in the same way as a web browser. If I say you can't use a web browser for a week, you'd be like, I can't function. If I said you can't use your smartphone for a week, you'd be like, how do I exist? I can't do my work. I can't live my life. If I said you can't use all of your assistants for a week, you'd be like, that's inconvenient, right? So I was struggling, I've been struggling to achieve importance with the assistant. I thought we had a shot at Samsung. I'm grateful for them to have given me that shot. And basically I had to look forward and say, do I think we're gonna get there? And my answer was, I don't think with Bixby, I'm gonna get there to the level of importance that I'm desperately seeking. And just like with Apple, I loved my time at Apple, but if I'm not working on something that's truly important, I'm not interested. I'm not there for a job. I'm not there I want to achieve greatness. I want to do something that will impact 1 billion people in a significant way. Everything I try to do has that goal. And if I say, okay, I'm not gonna get there, I'm gonna fall short, well, I can't waste time. I've got to get on to the next thing. I don't, life is short. Don't just sit there doing something that's not going to be important.
Right, it makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've been pursuing this vision for a long time. Yeah, and so I know that this love of technology was fostered by your imagination as a child. From toys like the Rock'em Sock'em robots and marble-based Ruby Goldberg machines. But you also had another passion as a child, studying magic. So can you tell us some of the principles that you've learned or observed in magic and how that ties in with building great technology?
Yeah, it's funny. I really owe it all to my mom. And, I had something growing up in kind of a relatively small town that most kids today don't have, which is boredom. Boredom is the root of all my creativity. I'd see a toy like the Rock'em Sock'em robots on TV and go, Mom, will you buy me that toy? She's like, nope, but here's a stock of cardboard from the cleaners. You can make it yourself, right? And so everything that I had was imagination and trying to come up with things that I would make and build. And I think, kids today, with all the social media and content streaming at them, there's no time to be bored, right? And when you have boredom, your mind starts to work to fill that void. I talk about active and passive activities. So if you're watching a movie, it's passive, it's beaming at you. If you're making your own movie, you're creating, you're using different mind muscles, you're creating. And so magic, what is magic? It's the ultimate creative thing. You have to imagine an impossible and desirable future, like something that doesn't exist. I want to fly, I want to disappear, and then you have to figure out how to make it come true. And so that starting with boredom and not being like having all this stuff beamed at you and consuming, you start to dream. And really, I tell this story, I say magic and entrepreneurship are exactly the same, because a magician, what do? They're not going to create something that exists. I need to do something that can't be done, that doesn't exist, that's impossible. Well, an entrepreneur, if you're starting a company, don't start a company to build something that exists already, because that company already has it and they've got customers and they've launched it. You have to imagine an impossible future. Think about Siri 20 years ago. You had just told someone, oh, you're going to carry a device in your pocket that at any point in time, anywhere in the world, just about, you can pull it out, speak to it using your own words, ask it any question, or even to do things, to accomplish tasks. Book me a French restaurant for 2 people tomorrow night in San Francisco, and it will do them for you. The restaurant will be booked. People would have thought you were crazy. That would have been a magic trick. And yet, having that dream and then working backwards to figure out the math and the science, that's what entrepreneurship is. That's what magicians are. I love them because I love magic, because it's about dreaming, it's about creating, it's about figuring out what people want, what would be desirable, and it's about hard math and science to make it come true. There is so much work that goes on behind what looks so effortless from a magician and from an entrepreneur that people never see. All they get to see is the finished product. But sometimes it's years or decades that go into hard work trying to make this impossible dream come true.
Yeah, I totally agree. I spent countless hours, and my friends and parents can attest to that. Countless hours just in the bedroom, either creating my own illusions or just honing my skills. But yeah, I totally agree. In the comments, and also in Zeal mentioned this earlier, but Arthur C. Clarke said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And a friend of yours, Kim Silverman, said that magic that is indistinguishable from technology is insufficiently advanced. So do you think what Kim is saying is true? And by the way, Kim is, for everyone who doesn't know, Kim is a product manager at Apple. Do you think what Kim is saying is true? And how do you push the boundaries of both magic and technology? What do you think is the ultimate final frontier for magic?
Wow, that's a big question. Magicians have always been at the cutting edge of technology. I mean, when electricity and magnetism was first created, who was using it first? Magicians, because you could do things that most people didn't know were possible. There's a famous magician, Alexander, the great Alexander, who would wear this turban, and he is like Alexander knows, and he would just read minds and get messages about people. How was he doing it? He had to wear the turban because there were these giant, like, wireless headphones under his turban, and someone's whispering and things to him, right? But people didn't know you could have radio and back in those early days. So science and magic are intertwined. Magicians are always trying to be just one step ahead. So I think that notion of what's possible today, like I said, Siri today, 20 years ago would have been magic. It would have been inconceivable, or 40 years ago, it would have been magic. It does go the other way. So what Kim was saying is magic that is indistinguishable from technology is insufficiently advanced. To me, I apply that to entrepreneurship as well. If you are starting a company, you want to strive for something magical, right? Magical. And if you're creating something that is just technology, it's insufficiently advanced, it's insufficiently far, it's not magic enough. So for me, I love Kim's quote. I take my own extracted meaning from it, but I apply it to entrepreneurs. When I say to an entrepreneur, what are you working on? I want to say, think big, be bold, dream, create magic. And if you think about Steve Jobs, who we were talking about, he was a magician. He didn't create the technology himself, right? He was not really the technology guy, but he could dream the vision. He could get up on stage and present the vision, and people went, wow, I've never seen that before. I want that. And so I would say, I do think it's both in entrepreneurship and in magic. It's a big mix of dreaming and technology and vision and selling. And, magic is at the heart of it. Create something beautiful and impossible and desirable, make it come true as a magician or an entrepreneur. And that's the secret to good business.
Oh, very nice. All ties in together. Back to Steve. Yeah. So do you think that there is kind of an end picture that magic should look like, right? Like you mentioned that it has to be different enough from technology to stand out, and entrepreneurship also has that challenge. But is there an image that a magician should be aiming for to distinguish itself from technology?
No, at its core, when you break down magic, there's only certain laws of physics that can be broken, right?
Right.
If something is here, it can't be there. Okay, well, let's make it move from here to there in a magical way. If something is A, it can't be B. Well, let's make it change into B. That's magic. So at its core, there's only, we start with a law of physics, what exists. And then you say, how can I break a law of physics? How can I create something that doesn't exist? But, so that sounds very restrictive, but it's a moving target, right? We can now fly in the air using airplanes. That was impossible 200 years ago. We can fly in the air using jetpacks. We can, technology moves. So what magic is always being one step ahead of what the world thinks is possible. Today there are so many things that we take for granted. My wife will, say, oh, this thing didn't work in this app. And I'm saying, well, you realize that you're holding a supercomputer with a cheap GPS coordinate that can access an interplanetary network of information that you can call up with your voice at any minute. Like, this is a miracle if it doesn't get every detail right, but don't forget the miracle of it all, right? So people just adjust to where the world is. Magician's job is really to remain one step forward. I think if you're too far ahead, just like in a company, if I had started Siri in 1993, it would have been too far ahead. It would have been, we weren't ready to embrace Siri back then. So timing for an entrepreneur and a magician is super important. So you can be too early, you can be too late. And the secret for an entrepreneur and a magician is to figure out where the world is, what's one step forward impossible and desirable, how do I make that come true? If you went too far, people wouldn't believe it, right? It wouldn't resonate. So I don't think there's an end state. I think it's a moving game. Just be thinking one step ahead, 2 steps ahead. Can't be too far out.
And that's great advice. So don't think too far ahead. Think just one step ahead.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, thanks. So as we draw towards the end of the prepared portion of this keynote, I also like to point out that part of HPAIR's mission is to create a forum for delegates to learn about important global economics and social issues. So something that many people probably don't know too much about you is that you founded the world's largest petition platform, Change.org, something that has seen increasingly use in 2020 wildfires and the Black Lives Matter movements. So this is wildly different from your background at Kalo and Siri, Viv Labs, Sentient. What is the story behind change.org, and what is one way that the delegates of today can strive to leave the world a better place?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking. So I really believe an entrepreneur should strive to impact positively a large number of people, and there are many ways to do that. The story of change.org, it all starts with Ben Rattray. He is the driving force. He's the CEO, founder. He is change.org. But when he came to San Francisco, I was the first technical person he met. He kind of had some ideas about how social networking was going to take off. This was 2006. And that social network for social activism could really help bring together people to make the world a better place. One of my mentors was a guy named Doug Engelbart. He had a similar vision, and I had been kind of schooled in that. He said, unless we get better at solving global problems collectively, we will not survive as a species. So what was he talking about? Things like pandemics, climate change, human rights, animal rights, sickness, hunger, poverty, terrorism. All of these things are not problems you can just snap and solve or discover a solution to, like penicillin. We need to get together as a world and get better at solving big problems. So I came into that schooled with this vision and desire to help people work better together. Ben Rattray had some great ideas about social networking for social activism. We started a first version of change.org. So I was there very early. All of the credit for change.org comes from the people who came after me. I had to go and leave and go do Siri and some of the other things. But what is it? It's a network of 425 million members who are solving problems, big and small, every single day. They identify a problem and a solution. And the form of a petition is, I want this organization to make this change, to do the solution, and here's why. And if you can post that and get some crowdsourced votes, you get a couple 100,000 people to click on that, that shines a spotlight on not only a problem, but a proposed solution. And that usually starts to bring about change in that direction. Sometimes for the smallest things, local problems, to some of the biggest problems. So change is one tool that really tries to harness collective intelligence to solve the world's biggest problems. I encourage delegates to take time to think about other ways we can help humanity. How can we fix the world we live in? All the different aspects of this. That's the best use of entrepreneurship. So I'm very proud to have been associated with change.org in the earliest days. So yeah.
Great. Okay.
If you're not a member, please take a look.
Great. So before we move into Q&A, do you have any final imparting words of wisdom for this young generation? Something like perhaps your greatest life secret tip?
Sure. So I usually don't give away my secrets. I'm a magician. But for this audience, I'm going to tell you, this is the thing that has brought me all of my success and happiness in life. And it's a simple tool you can try. I call it verbally stated goal. So here it is in a nutshell. I think of life being like a book. No book is just one long chapter. It's broken into chapters. Just like that, in life, you will have moments where you're a different person. Maybe you've just graduated school. What do you do next? You were a student, now you're going to be a professional. Maybe you've just gotten married. Maybe you're frustrated with something. You need to make a change. So my view is when you come to a chapter change, many people are scared. Like, oh, I'm afraid of change. I'm afraid to do something new. You need to embrace change, dream big, and say, what is important to me? So step one is at that chapter change moment, focus on the core emotion that you're feeling. What is it that you need? That's really in your heart, in your chest at that moment. It's not what people are telling you, the words, you know, oh, you're supposed to do this, or you're, no, what are you feeling? Once you get the feeling, you turn it into a mission statement of words. And every word matters. It should be as short and concise as possible. That captures that emotion. And once you have it, you tell every single person you meet, this is what I am going to do. Even if you have no idea how to do it. But by putting it out in the world, by using your words and telling people, I am going to achieve this, that does two things. One, it commits you to it, because like you tell 100 people, soon you're like starting to believe it yourself. The second thing it does is people start to help you. And they'll say, oh, I know this guy who blah, 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 or I have an idea that could help you get to that goal, right? So just by figuring out what is truly important to you at that time, putting it into words and telling everyone you meet, this has brought me every success in life. I'll give you just a few of these chapters. One was I finished school, I graduated. I'm like, what do I do now? How do I choose my job? Well, at that time, I had never traveled the world. And what was in my heart was I wanted a foreign perspective. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I said, I'm going to get a foreign perspective. And I ended up finding a way somehow to move to France and live there and learn a new language and travel. And it changed who I was. Another one, I didn't know if I was capable of falling in love. I didn't know if I could do it. One of my verbally stated goals, can I fall in love? Maybe it was a myth that others could do, but I had girlfriends, and I never felt that I would find one person I would stay with my whole life and love every day. That seemed impossible. But I wanted to know, is it possible for me? I've now been with my wife 26 years or something like that. It was possible for me, but it was a question I needed to know. The last one I'll give is I was frustrated at my job. I had all these ideas, but politically I couldn't get them out. And I felt what I was working on was just gonna not be useful anymore. And so I said, I wanna create 5 projects. I wanna create 5 projects that can impact users in 2007. 5 projects that can impact users in 2007. Every word mattered and was important to me. And I did. I created 5 prototypes. I showed them to people. And then my 2008 goal was 1 major, 1 minor. Take the best 2 ideas and start companies out of them. So Siri was my day job. Sentient was my night job. And actually Change.org was one of my prototype projects, spun out to be a 3rd company at the time. So that was really my entrepreneurship goal. Get out there and do something important. Create, dream. But it was the feeling in my chest. So try that. Think about where you are. If you're happy, write it out. But if you're frustrated or a chapter change is coming, you're going to graduate, you don't know what to do next, or you need something, figure out the emotion, turn it into words, and tell verbally everyone you meet, I'm going to do this. And that will commit you and people will help. Verbally stated goals, it's my greatest secret.
Oh, thanks for sharing. Yeah, I now know the secret to life. Does Lynn know about the fact that she was merely a goal? She was just...
She knows the story, but I think if I hadn't been open, if I hadn't made that goal, I wouldn't have been open to really falling in love with her in the way that I did. So it kind of, maybe we got lucky that I was looking and she was the answer.
That's how life is, right? It's just looking in the right places.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that concludes the prepared portion. Let's start Q&A. And the first Q&A I'd like to ask, first question I'd like to ask comes from Zio Patel, co-president of HPAIR. He asks, this concerns the sale of Siri to Apple. What was it like to negotiate with Steve Jobs? He has heard plenty of stories on how it's hard to negotiate with Steve Jobs.
Oh yeah, so all credit there goes to our CEO, Doug Kitlaus. You know, when we walked in that first day, he called us and come over to my house tomorrow. We spent 3 hours with him talking about the future. And then he said, oh, I want to buy the company. And we said, thank you, not interested, goodbye. And we left. So we were not planning to sell to the company. He came back a little bit later, and it was all about two things. One, I really, you know, as you've seen, I care about my vision, right? I'm very passionate about what I'm trying to do. And once he convinced me he understood it and would support it, that was a huge factor to us going to Apple. The second was the financial numbers got much higher, and Doug Kitlaus was a master at that. He is so good. He's like a poker player who can read across the table, and he had one-on-one, you know, multiple conversations, maybe 30 calls in 30 days with Steve, and he read it perfectly to get from kind of on the financial side, the initial offer to, you know, multiple times that initial offer. So that is really, you know, was masterful against Steve Jobs, one of the greatest negotiators and business people I think anyone knows. So, yeah.
That's kind of funny. It's like Steve Jobs got outmaneuvered by Doug.
He did, but part of it was Steve wanted it, right? We did the magic tricks. We presented it and showed what it could be. And Steve wanted it, which gave us leverage. Otherwise, we would have had no chance.
Oh, that's good to know. All right, next question. What were some of the challenges in the making of Siri?
Yeah, as I mentioned, Siri was largely about understanding natural language at scale. And I gave you an example, that book, A 4-Star Restaurant in Boston, blah, blah, blah. When I remember there was a day, we had a prototype that was working pretty well. And then we said, well, people want to talk about business names. How do I get to, you know, some business name, Il Fornaio restaurant? So we had to load in vocabulary. So the speech recognition and natural language would know those words, right? Fornaio is not in any dictionary, for instance. And so we loaded in 30 million business names. But of course, the business names are pretty complicated. It'll be Il Fornaio restaurant and grill company or something like that. And no one calls it that. They call it Il Fornaio, right? So we loaded in 30 million business names. We're having to do kind of fuzzy matching across all of these words. And we realized every word in the English language is a business name. Every word in the English language is a business name. So for any request, the ambiguities explode exponentially. And I remember a moment where we would type into the system, start over, to get it back to a good state. I type in start over and it goes, looking for businesses named over in Start, Louisiana. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what just happened? So I'd say the hardest thing for Siri was once we loaded in this crazy amount of vocabulary, crawling back to get the system to understand us again, given these combinatorial you know, possibilities of interpretations. So it was a technical challenge, but wow, once we got there, we cracked it, but it was hard. It was hard.
Great, thanks. So right before we wrap up, there's been this question that's been climbing. Now it's 32 upvotes. But what are some good AI book recommendations? And if you could just toss out 3 or 4, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I've been in AI for 30 years, so most of my recommendations are going to be really old and probably not the best ones. I would say go take a deep learning class from Andrew Ng on Coursera. I would say Peter Norvig wrote the classic AI book that I read back in the day. He's coming out with a new revised edition, so go find Peter Norvig's updated AI book. I think that will be great. There's one other, so those are a few, but really so much, it changes so fast. I would say go online. There's so many resources about AI and deep learning with data sets and tools that you can use. I don't think it's going to be a book these days. There's one question that I'd like to kind of answer. I see one that says, could you please address sexism in Siri, which is a big complicated thing. I'm not going to answer this full question because that's probably more time than we have. But many times people will say, well, why was Siri a woman? Do you think Siri needs to be a woman? So that's kind of often the base for a lot of the sexism criticisms of Siri. I want to point out that Siri was not a woman. And people say, well, what? No, but it is. And I said, in the beginning, so first of all, when you talk to Siri, its language response was always gender neutral. It would never say it was male or female. It would never say either one. And then people say, well, the voice was clearly a woman. And I would say, well, in the US, but actually in France and in Australia, it was male voices. And they're like, what? And so in the beginning, Siri was always envisioned as gender neutral. The voices were relatively randomly picked, kind of like whatever sounded best in that country. And then immediately after, version 2 of Siri had both a male and female voice for every locale, every country. So that's kind of one aspect I just wanted to correct. Many people think Siri needs to be a woman. I don't think that's not true at all. And the intention was never for it to be seen in that way from the earliest days.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you so much, Adam, for your time. I'm sure all the delegates here learned a lot. Yeah, the thing that I learned was to only look one step ahead. Don't think too far. That's really helpful. But for everybody else, I think that the closing ceremony is happening right now, and everyone should have it's a different Zoom link, so check your emails for that. And once again, thank you, Adam, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Congratulations to all the delegates.
And yeah, we will just let everybody jump off now.